On February 23, 1994, the Cleveland Cavaliers played the Washington Bullets at US Air Arena. Nothing about the night suggested that it belonged in basketball history. The crowd numbered fewer than 9,000. Cleveland was in the middle of the Eastern Conference standings. The game would be remembered, if at all, as a routine road win built on Mark Price's 22 points and a strong fourth quarter. Brad Daugherty started at center, as he had for nearly 8 years. He made 3 of 6 shots, scored 8 points, and left near the end of the first quarter after aggravating his lower back. The next day's report described both Daugherty and Larry Nance as day-to-day. That was the ordinary language of an ordinary February injury update. It offered no reason to stop the clock. Daugherty never played another minute in the NBA. There was no farewell possession, no final ovation, and no announcement that Cleveland's franchise center had just completed his career. He was 28 years old. He had been an All-Star 5 times, and only 11 months earlier he had finished a third consecutive season averaging at least 20 points and 10 rebounds. The Cavaliers had committed 9 years and more than $43 million to his future. On that night in Washington, his future lasted 11 minutes. The timing gave the injury a second meaning. 4 months earlier, Michael Jordan had retired from basketball. For most of Daugherty's career, Cleveland's best seasons had ended with Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in the way. Now Jordan was gone, and the Eastern Conference looked less predetermined than it had in years. The Cavaliers were no longer the young team that had first challenged him, and there were other contenders waiting, but at least the question seemed open again. Daugherty's back closed it before Cleveland could discover the answer. That is the tension running through his career. He was not a failed number 1 pick. He became precisely the player Cleveland hoped to acquire: productive, skilled, durable enough to build an offense around, and good enough to leave as the franchise leader in both points and rebounds. The uncertainty begins after those facts. How far could the Cavaliers have gone if their center's body had lasted into his early 30s? And why is a player who accomplished so much before 29 remembered mainly for the seasons he never had? To understand why Cleveland trusted him with its future, it helps to begin in Black Mountain, North Carolina, where Daugherty's life did not initially resemble the standard origin story of a dominant center. He was born on October 19, 1965, and grew up in a small town along the Blue Ridge Mountains. His mother allowed him to skip the 8th grade after his older brothers had done the same. The decision left him younger than almost everyone in his class, a difference that would follow him from high school into one of the most demanding college programs in the country. Basketball was not always the obvious destination. As a freshman at Charles D. Owen High School, Daugherty served as a student manager for the football team. He stood about 6'3". Coach Bill Burrow persuaded him to try basketball as a sophomore, and then his body changed almost faster than his understanding of the sport. By the beginning of his junior year, he had grown to roughly 6'10". Daugherty later remembered that the growth itself was not painful. He mostly slept more. The harder adjustment was learning what to do with a body that had suddenly made him impossible to overlook. By 1982, he was a McDonald's All-American and had led Owen to the state final. He was still only 16 when he arrived at the University of North Carolina. That number matters, but not because youth automatically made him a prodigy. It made him unfinished. North Carolina had just won the national championship. Dean Smith's returning roster included Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins, and Matt Daugherty. Some of the players Daugherty faced were 22 or 23, old enough to have spent nearly half a decade developing habits he had barely begun to understand. He later admitted that he lacked their attention span and work habits. He had been accustomed to scoring. Smith asked him to set screens, learn coverages, take charges, and move when the ball was somewhere else. His first college game ended in an upset loss to St. John's. Daugherty scored 9 points in 21 minutes. He did not enter the starting lineup until the 11th game, the final of the Rainbow Classic against Missouri. He played 12 minutes, scored 4 points, and collected 2 rebounds. His value was less visible in the box score. Starting him allowed Perkins to move to power forward, Daugherty to the wing, and Jordan into the backcourt. The arrangement showed the kind of player Daugherty would become. His presence could improve an offense without requiring every possession to end in his hands. He learned spacing, passing angles, and the unglamorous work that makes a half-court system function. His freshman average was 8.2 points. Each season, the production increased. By his senior year, he was no longer the overwhelmed 16-year-old trying to follow a Dean Smith practice. He averaged 20.2 points and 9 rebounds, shot nearly 65% from the field, and scored in double figures in 32 of 34 games. He earned first-team All-America recognition from the United States Basketball Writers Association and first-team All-ACC honors for the second straight season. Even then, one description followed him: soft. Part of it came from style. Daugherty was a skilled scorer rather than a theatrical one. He could establish position, finish with either hand, turn over either shoulder, and find cutters from the post. He did not build his identity around intimidation. Part of the label came from his early years at North Carolina, when a teenager really was less physically and mentally prepared than the older players around him. The word survived long after the reasons for it had disappeared. It would matter on draft night because Cleveland was not choosing in a vacuum. The Cavaliers had acquired the first selection from Philadelphia in exchange for Roy Hinson and cash. There was internal discussion about Len Bias, the explosive Maryland forward, and Daugherty, the polished center from North Carolina. Daugherty was not necessarily the most exciting choice. He was the one Cleveland believed could organize a franchise. On June 17, 1986, the Cavaliers selected him first overall. The choice carried unusual weight because Cleveland had spent much of the previous decade making it difficult to build through the draft. The franchise had reached the Eastern Conference Finals during the Miracle of Richfield in 1976, then slipped into years of instability and short-term transactions. By the middle of the 80s, new ownership and executive Wayne Embry were trying to build patiently instead of chasing another quick repair. Acquiring the first pick gave them a chance to choose the player around whom everything else would fit. Daugherty represented patience. A high-scoring wing could change the appearance of a team immediately. A center who passed, screened, rebounded, and understood spacing could give it a dependable shape for years. Embry had played center in the NBA and knew the position's demands. Dean Smith's recommendation carried weight. Cleveland believed Daugherty would become more valuable as the players around him improved. The context of the draft also made certainty impossible. Bias was a spectacular athlete and would go second to Boston before dying 2 days later, following a drug-related medical emergency. His death changed the meaning of the entire draft and should not be used to make Cleveland's decision seem obvious in retrospect. On the morning of the selection, the Cavaliers were choosing between basketball futures, not between a safe player and a tragedy nobody could foresee. They chose Daugherty because they believed his skills could hold a team together. The decision was only the beginning of a remarkable reconstruction. Cleveland used the 8th pick on Ron Harper, an athletic guard from Miami University in Ohio. It obtained the rights to Mark Price, selected by Dallas in the second round. John Hot Rod Williams, drafted the previous year but delayed by a legal case in which he was acquitted, entered the league with them. Daugherty, Harper, and Williams all made the all-rookie first team. The Cavaliers had not merely found a center. In one summer, they assembled much of the team that would define their next decade, then hired Lenny Wilkens to teach it how to win. The first season produced 31 victories. Daugherty averaged 15.7 points and 8.1 rebounds, strong numbers for a rookie center, but not the statistics of an instant savior. Cleveland's progress came from the way the pieces developed together. Price could stretch a defense and deliver the ball at the correct moment. Harper attacked space and guarded the perimeter. Williams supplied size and energy. Daugherty gave the offense a reliable point of entry. 1 year later, the Cavaliers won 42 games and returned to the playoffs. During that season, Cleveland traded for Larry Nance, an established all-star whose shot-blocking and mid-range game fit naturally beside Daugherty. The young roster now had experience without losing its mobility. Chicago eliminated Cleveland in the first round, but the result did not feel like the end of an opportunity. It felt like the cost of arriving early. The Nance trade revealed how aggressively Cleveland wanted to accelerate. On February 25, 1988, the Cavaliers sent rookie point guard Kevin Johnson, Mark West, Tyrone Corbin, and draft choices to Phoenix for Nance, Mike Sanders, and a first-round pick. Johnson would soon become an all-star, making the deal more complicated in retrospect. For Cleveland in the moment, Nance supplied precisely what the young group lacked: a veteran front-court defender who could block shots without occupying Daugherty's preferred spaces. The Cavaliers won 11 of their final 13 games and entered the playoffs at 42-40. Chicago beat them in 5 games. Jordan averaged 45.2 points in the series and scored 39 in the deciding game. Cleveland had improved enough to make the postseason and still discovered that ordinary improvement offered no answer for an opponent capable of turning a short series into an individual scoring exhibition. That first defeat established the rivalry before Cleveland became the favorite. It also established the division of labor that made the Cavaliers dangerous. Nance could guard above the rim. Price could pull defenders beyond their comfortable range. Daugherty could punish a smaller lineup inside or pass when the double team arrived. Harper gave them a perimeter athlete capable of playing in transition. Their strengths overlapped without becoming redundant. The following season changed the scale of the expectation. Cleveland opened 1988-89 by winning 24 of its first 29 games. Price became an All-NBA guard. Nance protected the rim. Harper supplied almost 19 points a night. Daugherty averaged 18.9 points and 9.2 rebounds while shooting better than 53%. The Cavaliers finished 57-25, tied for the second-best record in the league. They also played Chicago 6 times during the regular season and won all 6. In the final meeting, Cleveland rested Daugherty, Price, Harper, and Nance and won anyway. That history is essential to understanding what happened next. The Bulls did not enter the 1989 playoffs as an unbeatable dynasty. They were a 6th seed centered on an extraordinary player. Cleveland had the deeper record, home court advantage, and 6 recent reasons to believe it understood the matchup. If the Cavaliers were ever going to move past Jordan, this appeared to be the moment. The first-round series reached a deciding 5th game in Richfield. During the last 3 minutes, the lead changed hands 9 times. Jordan put Chicago ahead with 6 seconds left. Cleveland answered when Craig Alo took a handoff from Nance and scored a layup with 3 seconds remaining. The Cavaliers led 100-99. One defensive possession separated their best regular season from survival. Chicago called timeout. Brad Sellers inbounded. Jordan broke toward the foul line, caught the pass, took 2 dribbles to his left, and rose over Alo. The ball went in as the horn sounded. Jordan finished with 44 points. Daugherty had struggled to score, making 3 of 9 shots, but contributed 11 rebounds and 6 assists. None of that became the image the sport retained. The image was Jordan suspended in the air and Alo falling beneath him. In the Cleveland locker room, Daugherty shook his head and said, "We did everything right. I just can't believe it." The sentence became more accurate with time. It also risked simplifying what followed. Jordan was a central obstacle, but he was not the only force that kept Cleveland from reaching its expected future. The Cavaliers made consequential decisions of their own, and their bodies began failing in several places at once. After the 57-win season, Cleveland's margin disappeared from several directions at once. Price had already missed time following a collision with Rick Mahorn. Nance underwent ankle surgery. Daugherty needed surgery to address swollen nerves in his right foot and missed the first 41 games of the next season. This was a serious injury, but it was not the first warning from his back. That distinction matters because the end of his career did not begin as early or as neatly as hindsight sometimes suggests. While Daugherty rehabilitated, Cleveland traded Ron Harper to the Los Angeles Clippers in a deal centered on the rights to Danny Ferry, who was still playing in Italy. The move removed an athletic scorer from a team already missing its center. Daugherty returned in February, helped the Cavaliers reach 42 wins, and averaged 22.8 points in a 5-game playoff loss to Philadelphia. Jordan had nothing to do with that ending. The next season, Price tore the anterior cruciate ligament in his left knee after 16 games, and Hot Rod Williams missed nearly half the schedule. Cleveland won only 33 times. Daugherty responded with the best numbers of his career: 21.6 points, 10.9 rebounds, and better than 52% shooting. With the original system breaking around him, he proved that the system had not created his production. It could ask more of him without taking away his efficiency. His game was built on decisions as much as force. Cleveland could enter the ball to him, cut behind a double team, and trust that he would not hold it until the advantage disappeared. Over 8 seasons, he averaged 3.7 assists, an unusual figure for a center in that era. In the playoffs, the rest of his line held 19.1 points and 10.2 rebounds across 41 games. The partnership with Price made those decisions easier to see. Price was one of the league's earliest great high-volume three-point shooters, but reducing him to shooting misses how he manipulated a defense. A defender who chased Price over a screen created a lane. A big man who stepped out to stop him surrendered space behind the play. Daugherty could roll toward the basket, settle into the post, or receive the ball at an angle that allowed him to see the weak side. Their two-man game did not resemble the spread pick-and-roll offenses that would dominate decades later. The lane was more crowded, and illegal defense rules shaped where help could stand. Yet the underlying problem was modern. Commit 2 defenders to Price, and Daugherty would make the next decision before the rotation arrived. Stay home, and Price could shoot. Switch and Daugherty could establish position against a guard. Daugherty's efficiency made the system sustainable. He shot 53.2% for his NBA career and nearly 75% from the foul line. Those percentages mattered for a center asked to finish possessions without monopolizing them. Cleveland could run offense through him, receive a high-quality attempt or an open pass, and still preserve touches for Price, Nance, Harper, Williams, and Alo. His reputation never fit comfortably into the era's preferred categories. He was not the defensive spectacle of Olajuwon or Robinson, the scorer Ewing was, or the physical symbol Laimbeer became in Detroit. Daugherty's greatest strength was making 5 players function together, a quality coaches valued more easily than highlight reels could preserve. Calling that style soft ignored the work required to average 20 and 10 against Olajuwon, Ewing, Parrish, Laimbeer, Moses Malone, David Robinson, and eventually Shaquille O'Neal. In January 1989, Daugherty and Laimbeer exchanged punches and were both ejected and suspended. The fight was an ugly moment, not an achievement, but it made one point clearly. Daugherty's controlled style should not have been confused with fear. The Cavaliers finally returned to health in 1991-92. Price recovered. Williams returned. Nance remained effective. Daugherty again averaged more than 21 points and 10 rebounds, earned his 4th All-Star selection, and made the All-NBA third team behind David Robinson and Patrick Ewing. Cleveland won 57 games for the second time in 4 seasons. This version of the team was different from the one Jordan had shocked in 1989. Harper was gone, the initial innocence was gone, and the roster understood how quickly a promising year could disappear. What remained was a group healthy at the same time, something Daugherty knew not to take for granted. The postseason began with a first-round victory over New Jersey. Boston waited in the conference semifinals. The Celtics still carried Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, and the historical weight of a franchise that expected to survive Game 7. Cleveland had not reached the conference finals since 1976. The series moved back and forth. Daugherty opened it with 26 points and 17 rebounds. Cleveland later faced elimination in Boston and lost Game 6 by 31, a result that could have turned the deciding game into a referendum on whether the Cavaliers were still too fragile for the moment. Instead, Daugherty attacked immediately. He scored 16 points in the first quarter of Game 7. Cleveland shot 73% in the period and built a 14-point lead. Boston never came closer than 10 after halftime. Daugherty finished with 27 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, and 3 blocks as the Cavaliers won by 18. Afterward, he did not describe the victory as destiny. He spoke about the interruptions, injuries, trades, and the difficulty of finally having everyone available. Cleveland had earned the right to find out what a healthy version of itself could do. The answer led back to Chicago. The Bulls were now defending champions, and Jordan was no longer a brilliant star trying to escape the first round. He was the league's defining player. Cleveland lost Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals, then delivered one of the strongest responses of the era. In Game 2 at Chicago Stadium, the Cavaliers built a 27-point lead and won 107-81. Price scored 21 in the first half. Daugherty added 16. Cleveland had not merely stolen a road game, it had embarrassed the champions on their floor. 4 games into the series, the teams were tied. The split mattered because Cleveland had moved the argument beyond one famous upset. The Cavaliers won Game 4 at home, 99-85, despite Price playing through illness and Daugherty failing to make a field goal until late in the fourth quarter. Defense, rebounding, and depth carried a night when the two offensive stars did not. For several days, the series became a best-of-3 between the defending champions and a challenger that had already demonstrated it could win in Chicago. Jordan changed the temperature in Game 5. He scored 37 points as the Bulls regained control at Chicago Stadium. Game 6 returned to Richfield. Cleveland trailed after the first quarter, pulled even by halftime, and entered the fourth tied at 72. Daugherty finished with 18 points, 13 rebounds, and 6 assists. Nance supplied 25 points and 16 rebounds. Jordan and Scottie Pippen each scored 29, and Chicago executed the final minutes more cleanly. The loss was not a collapse, which may be why it left less mythology than the shot. There was no single defensive mistake capable of explaining the series. Cleveland had reached the last 6 minutes of Game 6 with a chance to force a 7th game against the defending champions. Chicago made the plays required to prevent it. For Daugherty, the run confirmed both the possibility and the cost. He averaged 21.5 points and 10.2 rebounds across 17 postseason games, playing more than 40 minutes a night. The Cavaliers had finally remained healthy long enough to build a complete playoff sample. It ended 2 victories short of the finals. That is the closest Daugherty's Cavaliers came to changing the hierarchy of the East. Chicago won Game 5, then closed the series in Cleveland with a 99-94 victory. The Bulls went on to win a second consecutive championship. There was no single shot to isolate this time. Cleveland had reached the conference finals, split the first 4 games, and lost to the better team over 6. The result hurt differently from 1989 because it contained evidence that the Cavaliers belonged at that level. Daugherty was 26. Price was 28. The natural assumption was that more opportunities would follow. In September 1992, Cleveland acted on that assumption by giving Daugherty a 9-year contract extension worth $43.6 million. The length was extraordinary, but the logic was recognizable. A small market franchise had secured a homegrown all-star through what should have been the rest of his prime. The contract was not payment for a nostalgic past, it was a forecast. Daugherty rewarded the decision in the first season of the extension. In 1992-93, he averaged 20.2 points, 10.2 rebounds, and a career-high 4.4 assists. Price made the All-NBA first team. Nance remained an elite defender. Cleveland won 54 games. The first round against New Jersey reached a deciding 5th game. Daugherty played 46 minutes and produced one of the most complete games of his career. 24 points, 20 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. Cleveland advanced. It was the final playoff series Daugherty ever won. Chicago swept the Cavaliers in the next round. The last game ended with another Jordan jumper at the buzzer, on the same end of the same building where the shot had landed 4 years earlier. Cleveland's 54 wins, Daugherty's 3 straight 20 and 10 seasons, and Price's best individual year had produced a shorter run than the season before. The defeat also marked the end of the Lenny Wilkens era. Wilkens left to coach Atlanta. Mike Fratello took over a team whose core was beginning to age around Daugherty and Price. Nance was 34. The original young Cavaliers of 1986 no longer existed in the same form. Then, on October 6, 1993, Jordan announced his retirement. The news did not hand Cleveland the East. New York had won 60 games the previous season. Indiana was rising. Orlando had Shaquille O'Neal. Houston would win the next championship from the West. The Cavaliers themselves had changed coaches and were already dealing with the mileage accumulated during years of injuries. But Jordan's departure removed the opponent that had eliminated Cleveland in 4 of Daugherty's first 7 postseasons. For the first time since the Cavaliers became contenders, they could enter spring without knowing that every route was likely to pass through number 23. Daugherty never reached that spring. His final season was uneven. He remained effective, averaging 16.6 points, 9.9 rebounds, and 2.9 assists in 50 games, but his availability became unreliable. The back problem did not arrive as one cinematic collapse. He missed time, returned, and tried to continue. In a January game against Houston, he played 44 minutes, scored 23 points, and collected 18 rebounds. 3 weeks before his final appearance, he lasted only 8 minutes against San Antonio. Against New York on February 17th, he played 40 minutes and scored 22. Those swings made the end difficult to recognize. A player who could still produce 22 points one night did not appear finished. 6 days later in Washington, Daugherty played 11 minutes before re-injuring his lower back. Cleveland won without him. Newspaper coverage focused on the Bullets' scoring drought and Mark Price. The report listed Daugherty as day-to-day. There was no reason for the crowd to understand that the last image of his NBA career had already passed, number 43 leaving an unremarkable February game before halftime. The box score makes the ending look even smaller. Daugherty played exactly 11 minutes. He had 1 rebound, 2 assists, and no blocked shots. Washington's Gjorga Murison, 7 feet 7 inches tall, entered from the bench and briefly disrupted Cleveland after Daugherty left. The article treated that matchup as part of the game's tactical movement, not as a transfer between a center completing his career and another near the beginning of his. There is an understandable temptation to search those 11 minutes for a final statement. The record does not provide one. Daugherty did not score on a last possession designed for him or leave after a visible collision that silenced the building. He aggravated an existing problem, went to the locker room, and became an injury note beneath a Cavaliers victory. That absence of ceremony is central to the loss. A farewell allows an athlete to understand the moment while it is happening. Daugherty spent his final NBA appearance expecting another treatment, another evaluation, and another return. The knowledge that it was over arrived slowly, distributed across medical appointments, and failed attempts to move without stiffness. He missed the final 29 games of the regular season. Cleveland finished 47-35 and met Chicago again in the playoffs. Jordan was playing minor league baseball, but the Bulls still had Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, and the habits of a champion. They swept the Cavaliers. Chicago's sweep exposed how much had changed. Nance also missed the series and retired. Price was older, and the roster's window had narrowed in more than one place. Cleveland could not recreate 1992 simply by removing Jordan from the bracket. What the injury removed was not a certain title. It removed the test. Daugherty had spent his career being measured against the same opponent. When that opponent disappeared, he lost the ability to establish what Cleveland might look like without him. The unanswered question survived because his body did not. The medical reality soon became clearer than the initial phrase, lower back strain. On November 3, 1994, surgeons removed 2 herniated discs that were pressing against nerves in Daugherty's spine. The procedure was intended to relieve the pain and restore enough movement for a return. Rehabilitation produced progress without an answer. Daugherty lifted weights, jogged lightly, and shot baskets. What he could not do was sustain 5-on-5 basketball. Running the floor brought stiffness. The problem was not only whether he could tolerate pain for one possession, it was whether his back could repeatedly change direction, absorb contact, and carry a 7-foot body through an NBA schedule. The distinction between pain and function shaped the decision. Daugherty later said he could have played with pain. Professional athletes do that routinely, and he had already spent years managing the normal damage of the position. The nerve pressure and reduced mobility were different. Knowing where to rotate did not matter if his lower body could not respond at NBA speed. A center who arrived half a step late endangered both himself and the defense around him. The operation offered no clean timetable. Removing the damaged discs addressed a physical cause without guaranteeing that the surrounding nerves and movement patterns would recover. Daugherty could complete controlled exercises that resembled pieces of basketball. The game required all of those pieces at once, under contact, without the ability to stop when stiffness appeared. Meanwhile, Cleveland continued without him. Fratello built one of the league's slowest and strongest defenses, and the Cavaliers won 43 games in 1994-95. That success did not prove Daugherty was replaceable. It demonstrated how dramatically the team's identity had changed. Cleveland could suppress scoring and remain competitive, but it no longer possessed the same interior playmaking or offensive ceiling. He searched for a different conclusion. Daugherty consulted doctors across the country, receiving opinions that did not always point in the same direction. Wayne Embry later estimated that he had seen roughly 10 physicians. For 2 seasons, the Cavaliers retained a player who wanted to return but could not demonstrate that his body would allow it. The meaning of waiting changed with time. At first, Daugherty could measure progress in weeks. The next examination, the next increase in training, the first attempt to jog. Then the milestones became seasons. Opening night arrived without him. The playoffs arrived without him. Another training camp began, and controlled workouts still could not become a full game. The limbo explains why the retirement appeared confusing from outside. In June 1996, reports emerged that Daugherty intended to stop playing before he had formally informed the team. That was not evidence of a secret dispute about whether he cared to return. It reflected how long he had resisted making the decision final. Daugherty later described a private ritual. "I'd wake up in the morning and twist around to see if the back would be better." By the summer of 1996, it was not getting better. An NBA physician declared him medically unable to play. On July 22nd, Daugherty confirmed that his career was over. He was 30, more than 2 years removed from his last game. The remaining contract was substantial, about $21 million over 4 years, but the league's insurance system was expected to pay it, allowing the Cavaliers to remove the salary from their cap. The contract remains part of the story because it shows how completely both sides had believed in a long future. It should not be turned into an accusation that Daugherty chose money over basketball or single-handedly trapped the organization. His career ended through a medical determination after surgery, rehabilitation, and repeated attempts to find a path back. He finished with 10,389 points, 5,227 rebounds, and 2,028 assists. At the moment he stopped playing, he was Cleveland's career leader in both scoring and rebounding. He had accumulated those records in 548 games. The scoring mark stood until March 21, 2008, when LeBron James passed it against Toronto. The rebounding record lasted until December of the same year, when Zydrunas Ilgauskas also surpassed Daugherty against the Raptors. It took one of the greatest players in history and a center who spent 12 seasons with Cleveland to remove his name from the top of those categories. On March 1, 1997, the Cavaliers retired number 43. The ceremony did not answer the Hall of Fame question or restore the seasons his back had taken. It established something narrower and secure. Whatever Daugherty's career lacked in length, Cleveland considered its value permanent. The number carried another history. Daugherty had chosen 43 in honor of Richard Petty, the NASCAR champion whose car made the number famous. Stock car racing was not a hobby discovered after retirement. It belonged to his childhood in western North Carolina, where racing occupied the same cultural landscape as high school sports and weekends outdoors. That detail offered Daugherty a direction when basketball ended. He became involved in team ownership, first in the Craftsman Truck Series with Liberty Racing. In 1997, Kenny Irwin Jr. won twice for the organization. Daugherty later worked in broadcasting and joined the ownership group that became JTG Daugherty Racing, a full-time NASCAR Cup Series operation. The transition required a different kind of credibility. In basketball, his body and resume introduced him before he spoke. In racing, being a 5-time NBA All-Star did not make a car faster. He had to learn sponsorship, personnel, engineering relationships, and the economics of keeping a smaller team alive against organizations with deeper resources. Liberty Racing gave Daugherty his first long apprenticeship in ownership. The team competed in the Truck Series during a period when NASCAR was expanding nationally but remained deeply rooted in regional relationships. Kenny Irwin Jr.'s 2 victories in 1997 gave the organization immediate legitimacy. Irwin soon moved to the Cup Series, while Daugherty learned how quickly success in racing can separate a driver, sponsor, and organization. Daugherty also became a broadcaster across both sports. The work suited the part of his basketball game that had been least visible in highlights: recognition. Explaining why a defense moved or why a driver protected a line required the same habit of seeing a sequence before reducing it to a result. Television kept him near basketball, while team ownership gave him something the playing career no longer could: a competitive project whose durability did not depend on his spine. When he joined JTG Racing's ownership group in 2008, the scale increased. The organization entered full-time Cup competition the next season and spent years fighting for relevance against multi-car TMs. A.J. Allmendinger delivered its first Cup victory at Watkins Glen in 2014. The Daytona result would arrive 9 years later, after enough ordinary seasons to make one extraordinary Sunday meaningful. It also placed him in spaces where he was often the only black person in the garage. Daugherty did not frame that isolation as a reason to leave. He treated it as another part of entering a sport he had loved before basketball made him famous. On February 19, 2023, the two halves of his public life met at Daytona. Earlier that day, Daugherty visited Richard Petty, the man whose number he had carried through his NBA career. An eye problem forced him to leave the track and watch the race alone from his home in Orlando. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. survived the longest Daytona 500 ever run. A crash froze the field during overtime, and officials needed to review the order. When the result became official, the number 47 car owned by Daugherty's group had won. Daugherty sat for a moment in front of the television, realized there was nobody in the room to celebrate with, and began talking to himself. Then his phone filled with calls and messages. The victory made him the first black primary team owner to win the Daytona 500. The Daytona Trophy did not replace an NBA championship or return the seasons his back had taken. It proved something more useful. The ending in Washington had not been the last important result of his competitive life. Daugherty had spent years in racing, endured the ordinary defeats of a small organization, and finally reached its largest stage. His reaction was not that fate had repaid him. It was that the work had been worth it. Basketball remained present. He became an analyst, returned to Cavaliers broadcasts, and represented the franchise at the 2020 draft lottery. He remained connected to Western North Carolina through charitable work addressing hunger. Black Mountain led him to Chapel Hill, Cleveland, and Daytona without becoming merely the place he had left behind. His basketball resume still has limits. Daugherty played 8 seasons, reached 1 conference final, and made 1 All-NBA team. Other centers from his era played longer, won more awards, and built postseason records he never had time to approach. But missing years should not erase the level he had already reached. Daugherty averaged more than 20 points and 10 rebounds for 3 consecutive seasons. He dominated Game 7 against Boston in 1992 and produced 24 points, 20 rebounds, and 8 assists in a deciding playoff victory the following year. His career did not end during a visible decline. It ended while those performances were still the best evidence of what Cleveland could build around him. That is why February 23, 1994 matters more than its box score. Cleveland won. Daugherty scored 8 points. The newspaper called him day-to-day. Every piece of information suggested continuation, yet continuation was the one thing he would not receive. Jordan had created the most memorable endings of Daugherty's playoff career. The back injury created the final one without a camera angle anyone would replay. Brad Daugherty fulfilled the central promise of the #1 pick. He became a franchise player, helped transform a losing organization, and left records that survived until the LeBron era. What he could not fulfill was the duration that Cleveland purchased and his prime appeared to offer. The title he might have won remains imaginary. The player he became does not.